We love to be able to say, oh, that's because X, Y, and Z. They made me, they require me, pointing fingers, and this leader's terrible, that leader's terrible. This book is really at its heart about self-leadership. Regardless of what's happening externally, all of these things, I know who I want to be in the midst of this.
From LinkedIn News, I'm Jessi Hempel, and this is Hello Monday. You know, we love Brené Brown around here, and there's a reason why her work is so popular. Brené understands that business is about people. It's about how we connect. I think here about this conversation that we had last fall.
The core muscles that we need right now are all built on humanity, human connection, deep human skills like courage, mastery, trust. And so what you're seeing in organizations is folks who need to get into a gym, do the reps for building back humanity at work.
Brené really gets it. So when she told me to pay attention to Aiko Bethea's work, I did. Aiko is the founder of Rare Coaching and Consulting, and through their shared work, she has become friends with Brené. In fact, Aiko oversaw the development of leadership strategies for the Brené Brown Education and Research Group. Now Aiko has a new book. It's called Anchored, Aligned, Accountable, a framework for transcending bullshit and transforming our lives and work. If Brené talks about building back our humanity at work, Aiko is invested in showing us exactly how to do it. Here's Aiko. In reading your book, it felt like a spiritual cousin to Brené's work. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to actually start by reading you a sentence that jumped out at me.
Sure.
And maybe we can start our conversation there. You write, remember that the only way you can belong everywhere at once is when you belong to yourself. Instead of running yourself ragged, trying to force transformation on others and environments beyond your control, focus on owning your impact, staying accountable to yourself and your values, and cultivating the self-awareness to know your own intentions. Mm-hmm. What do you hope to unlock with your book?
One, I'll say, just out of attribution, people might recognize a part of that quote as emanating from Maya Angelou, too. So I want to be able to acknowledge that. I want people to be able to start having conversations with themselves that they haven't had before, and to be courageous and being very honest with themselves about their beliefs, their intentions, how they want to be. And then, wow, if they would be able to not only have conversations with themselves, but to coach themselves in moments that really matter. Stop and pause and dig deep, what I would love.
You set such a high bar for humanity in writing this book. You seem to have high expectations of us. And it struck me as I was reading this book that it lands at a moment in business culture where our own expectations of ourselves feel lower than they have ever felt. And I'll give you some context for what I mean. It feels like we are in a moment of chaos and change. People are quick to point to AI, and that's certainly part of it. But what is also true is that it feels like the cycles of business have sped up. And what I hear from our listeners is that in the 7 years that I have been recording the show, things have never felt as chaotic. People are experiencing layoffs and job loss. Mm-hmm. And what I hear more about is like within business, people are in environments where like you may be working on a project and it's going so well and you're feeling great about it. 7 months in, that everything changes. That project is no longer on the roadmap and you're expected to work on something else with a different set of skills and a new set of people. And that is not an exception, it's a norm. It felt to me like it's no accident that your book with tools for how to connect deeply with people arrives at just the moment when it's feeling harder than ever to connect around meaningful work. I'm curious if the experience that I describe, that our listeners describe to me, feels in line with what you're seeing in your practice.
Absolutely. When you said 7 months later, after you've been working on a project, I thought, wow, 7 months is actually a long time.
It's a long time.
Because I see it changing even more rapidly with folks after they're deeply invested. And as you know, a lot of folks, their identity is so connected to their work that jarring or that shift or disruption that happens isn't just about the project and the time I invested, but what does this mean for me and what happens now? So there is multifaceted in the way that it shifts things, relationships, all of these other things. So absolutely, things are moving faster. Change is happening in a way that feels much more intense. Another thing I often hear from clients is, wow, it used to be that there were quiet seasons. There's no longer any quiet season. We're working right through holidays. You might get a week off, but there's no downtime.
Yeah.
And what I would say is this points to the importance of why this book is really at its heart about self-leadership.
Yeah.
Because there's a couple of things that it's more apparent that we can't do and rely on external factors to give us. One is the pacing in which we live. If you're the metronome to your own life, and if you're always waiting for when things slow down, when this happens, when that happens, it may never happen.
Yeah.
And so it's not only the timing and the pacing we have to have leadership over and have an idea of how we want it to be so that we can make it so. Or at least we realize when, wow, there's this friction here and I'm not just subjected to, but I do have choice and agency to a degree. The other thing that's different is not only the pacing, but we want people to be able to say, I do have agency and choice because we used to look for different models for leaders and say, I want to be like that person. I want to be like that person. And now we know everybody's human and they have foils and some in darker ways than we ever thought.
Yeah.
And therefore, we have to look towards who do I want to be? And in that quote that you just now shared, I need to belong to myself first and connect to myself first.
Yeah.
For there to be reason and purpose and for me to be accountable for this one life I have.
So let's walk through the aspects of the framework and then let's look at some examples. She beautifully do in the book for us.
Sure. So the framework is simple: anchored, aligned, accountable. Be anchored into your values, meaning you know what your North Star is. Those are your top two values and the behaviors, of course, around them. It indicates who you aspire to be and what's most important for you in your core self.
Yeah.
Then alignment, ensuring that your actions, the decisions you make, your behaviors are in alignment with those two values.
Yeah.
And then the accountability part is taking ownership and accountability for the impacts that you have, right? Because we can have all types of intentions about, I know these are my values, this decision I made, I intended it for it to X, Y, and Z, exemplify these values.
Yeah.
But then oh man, that's not what I intended. Because I look at what the impact was.
Yeah.
And the accountability part is owning it.
Yeah. To really understand it. It is so helpful to think about it and talk about it in practice. And also to talk about how you evolved it. And I thought it was interesting, your book opens with the foreword from Brené Brown. And it sounds like she was an important friend and thought partner for you as you evolved this. Where did that relationship start? How do you guys know each other?
Oh, man. So I attended one of her trainings when she was training facilitators on her work when Dare to Lead was just really coming out. Probably about 150 or 200 folks from around the world who were there in San Antonio. A lot of them did not look like me. But one of the things that stood out to me that Brené did is that when she opened up the session, she was talking about Audre Lorde and Bell Hooks and all these folks as if they were just, everybody in this room should know these people. And I thought, I know them and I love them, but was there some pre-work? I didn't think anyone else knew these names. And she was incredibly receptive when I asked questions that were maybe brought some friction because I really wanted to understand the work at different levels. And she was so open and curious about it and not defensive at all. And when she wanted to meet during the break, and when we met, she asked me what I thought about the training. And I was like, it's great, but did you expect everyone in the room to understand who Bell Hooks or Audre Lorde or these people were? She was like, you don't think they did? I was like, no, I don't think so. Of course, she has a PhD in social work, right?
Right.
So she did something that you rarely see someone having the ability to do, which is for a room of about, 200 people or so, maybe there are about 6 brown people in the room.
Yeah.
She was able to, just by being so receptive to questions that had a cultural context, and also bringing in names like Audre Lorde, et cetera, as part of this teaching. She was able to do this thing, I just call it flipping the room, where you can make someone who's on the peripheral or the outside feel like they're right in the center and they're supposed to be there and that they belong there. Even though in numbers you see you're not, you're one of the very few, but someone who's talking your language and your experience.
Yeah. Talk more about that, because that quality is so fundamental for healthy organizations where people feel like they can bring their full self to bear. Part of it is about references, even if you don't necessarily have representation. What else is there?
So there's definitely layers around being able to do that. One is whenever you hear Brené talking about herself in different contexts, she says researcher, storyteller, fifth generation Texan, being very clear about understanding what you can assume about that. She says a white woman, like all these things. Once someone has named these aspects of their identity, one is letting you know they see themselves, right? And then they also see themselves in contrast.
Yeah.
Because many people, if you notice, they won't necessarily say, especially if you're in dominant culture, you're not going to say, I'm a straight, able-bodied, what have you. So when somebody names it and owns these aspects of where they have power, now that means that you understand the contrast and the similarity. The other part is how you respond to curiosity. And is there going to, I talk about these different types of the BS, right? So you're going to be defensive, or are you going to cave and people please? What are you going to do when you see that those aspects aren't present with how someone's showing up? Or when it is present, they either catch themselves, or if they're called on it, they lean into it versus double down. That lets you know, wow, this is a space of non-judgment, and the person's going to be curious. So all these are giving permission.
Right.
And one of the things that she said in the workshop, she said, I can guarantee you that it was like a few of us, 5 or 6, she's like, the Black people in the room all know where each other is. And we all know that that's something we do, and we do it almost like we may not even realize we do it, but you do it out of safety and understanding space. So when someone names and recognizes, wow, there's this experience, we really do have that, and you're naming it and validating it and not saying it in a form of judgment, but for other people to be aware of what they don't have to carry.
Yeah. That was really a starting off point for your own work, the discussion of power and privilege and how we understand it as the starting point for anything that we're doing. And I wonder if you might have any, directives or suggestions for our listeners as they are trying to bring their full self to bear in their office. Like how can we think newly or differently about the way that power might be working in our very organizations?
Yeah, I think it's really hard for people, and I'll say it intentionally. I don't think anywhere in the book are you going to see the word privilege. Right?
That was mine.
And we do talk about power and unpacking the many ways that power shows up. Because usually in a workplace, how often do you go to a workplace and people even talk about power?
We understand it in one way. It's a hierarchy, right? There's the boss and the boss's boss and the boss's boss, and that's the person whose emails you always respond to right
Yes,
away.
and fast. Yesterday.
Yes.
So oftentimes we have permission to talk about power in terms of title. But in a workplace ecosystem, we know that power plays out in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Who has the largest budget? Who has the closest proximity to the CEO? Who has the largest team?
Right.
Who has the longest tenure? It's all of these different things that are proxies for power that we know are playing out. Who gets information or is privy to information?
Right.
Who went to this school versus that school? When you understand this, you understand how a system is working. What's okay, what's not, what's allowed, what isn't, who's important and valued, and who isn't. And I'm not talking about just individual behaviors, it's how a system works, because you have to understand how to navigate the system. But that also means that for many people, they are very aware of, I don't have power. And when I come into the room, I'm coming into the room as a deficit. So if I'm going to come in and call somebody on something or name something, it'll be more difficult for me, and I might be more vulnerable to figure out how to navigate the system safely.
Yeah.
But if I have power, I'm not necessarily ever required to acknowledge or recognize it. I can even pretend it doesn't exist, or I may never notice it, which means when we're talking about things like psychological safety, if a leader doesn't recognize the power they have,
Right.
not only in hierarchy, but also just simply in identity,
Yeah.
they're not going to notice where other people don't, and that's why they're not going to speak up.
Yeah.
Or what if they do dare to speak up? Are we going to be able to recognize the repercussions they may experience? Not because, just something was said, but that person said it, and the risk and the weight for them to say it. And that's why in the workplace, it's so important to understand capital like power.
Yeah. Aiko, I'm going to ask you a question that is going to reveal all the things I don't know about
Sure.
this material. And what's wrong with the word privilege? Why do you choose not to use it?
So when I wrote the book, I knew that my intention was I want everyone to be able to come to the table and see themselves in it. And I already know that many people, it's polarizing to think about the fact that I have some type of power that might be seen as unearned, especially today. But I wanted people to come and meet the book where they could, where they're at. And I know that a word like privilege is so isolating and polarizing. But someone wrote me and they said, wow, you talked about all of these aspects around identity, et cetera, without really saying X, Y, and Z.
You did do that.
And I thought, because those things, it doesn't matter about X, Y, and Z as much as I want somebody to do the reflection. Because self-leadership, and when you're reflecting on these things, you'll come to these curiosities based on the more open you are, the more you're practicing critical curiosity, you can come to those in a place where you might even feel less judgmental towards yourself.
Yeah. Which is a beautiful thought, actually.
Mm-hmm.
So what does it really mean to be anchored?
It means that when everything around you is shaking, you're the ground. It means that regardless of what's happening externally, all of these things, I know who I want to be in the midst of this. So it's this idea, and what's really scary about that, Jessi, is that when I know that, there's nobody else who can be accountable for that choice I make in that moment. And we love to be able to say, oh, that's because X, Y, and Z. They made me. They required me. I was always taught X, Y, and Z.
Right.
But if you're anchored into who you corely want to be, that's your true north all the time.
Yeah.
And when you're always aware of it,
Right.
you're always presented with agency and choice.
Right. So much of that is deeply understanding your values, right?
It is.
I feel like you ask us to take the values work to a deeper place. So you sort of poke holes in some of the more superficial ways that I might point to my values. I'll give you an example. If I had to choose 3 values right now, I would absolutely put family as the top value.
Of course.
And my wife would too. And actually reading your book made me realize that actually my wife and I would mean completely different things when we wrote family at the top of the list.
Okay, so what were the behaviors that came up for you when you said family?
When I think about family, I think about economically providing for my family, which is not usually a surprise. I'm the breadwinner in our household. And I came from a family that thought a lot about economic safety. And when my wife thinks about family, I think she thinks about it in terms of time spent. It's also critical to me. These things aren't not in alignment, right?
Yes.
But they're different things.
Yes. So I usually, if I'm facilitating or coaching, and people are looking for values and they say family, I was like, what's the behaviors? And I was like, the word doesn't matter. It's the behaviors, because if somebody heard yours and you said family and you said economically providing, someone might say, oh, that's not family, that's financial security.
Yeah.
So we really want to know just the behaviors. Being anchored in your values and knowing them are so core, because they tell us so much about how we connect with ourselves and others. It's almost like a cheat sheet.
Yeah.
And imagine if you know that about all of your teammates.
Yeah. Here I think about some of the corporate exercises we do during offsites that are meant to help reveal the different ways that our values surface. And it feels like such a lightweight way. It's like the diet soda version of what we're really going for, which is the deep self-reflective work.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know that we make the time or the space or slow down enough in our work to do the work as deeply as it would need to be done in order to have the impact that is possible when we do it.
Yes. So the time part comes up a lot. We don't have enough of time. This needed to be done yesterday. But this other part about knowing your values is that it creates this degree of efficiency. Because when I know what my values are, I'm able to make decisions, hard decisions, faster.
Yeah.
I'm able to problem solve, especially internally, if something just feels off. Like, why can't I get along with Ben? Is 80% of the time with clients, if they go to those top two values, they realize, oh, it's because of this.
We just need
There's
these
this
guys to
breach.
talk to each other.
So taking a beat to do that work around values and to share it with your colleagues helps you to actually be much more effective. It helps you to feel like you have more agency because something's not being done to you, but you're making a choice. Because it really is like a point of privilege to be able to be at a workplace where your values are just so in sync with everything that's asked of you.
Yeah.
But I'm not just going to be in the doldrums or resentful and angry. I can say, it's because of this.
Right.
And I'm going to choose to still be here because of that. I can do my own.
That's the alignment piece, right?
Yes.
Like, now I understand that these are the values of my organization and they are adjacent to my own personal values. And here's the place where there's no overlap. And therefore I can make my decision about how to act.
That's right. Am I going to stay or am I going to go? Or can I have different types of boundaries and I'm not adhering to them? No one's asking me to do these things, but I'm like over-indexing.
Yeah.
Like maybe I can still adhere to my boundaries here and show up in a different way and still have great impact.
Right. Right. I want to spend a few minutes on accountability and where people often go wrong with accountability.
When you hear the word accountability, what first comes up for you, Jessi?
Well, I'll tell you, the two things come up for me. One, my son goes to the best elementary school. And part of what makes it really exceptional is that it has a disciplinary practice that I did not understand at all at the beginning around restorative justice. And I think that my wife and I have learned as much as my son in his experience at the school. And so much of the accountability piece in a disciplinary action is about listening. And so little of it is about apologizing. So I will say that is the first thing that comes up. And then on a quicker response level, when I hear the word accountable, I think, well, how can I fix this?
Okay. So the one thing that's easy, I think people can relate to right off is fixing. Okay, to be accountable now, I have to fix it. And then when you added the part about with your son, no one's apologizing. Sometimes we think apology is the fixing, right?
Yeah.
And accountability. So you have one that may feel really open-ended, like what in the hell is happening here? Because there's nobody's taking ownership here.
Yeah.
And when we fix things, it usually means ownership somewhere, like who did it? What's going on here?
Yeah.
And so the issue with accountability often is this idea of accountability feels either punitive rather than accountability having even this more actionable step, which listening has a part to do with it, which is being really curious. Like you can hold people accountable with generosity. And curiosity connects with that so much. So let's just say you said something or used some word or what have you, and it was such an affront to me.
Yeah.
And I can be activated and say, Jessi, why did you blah, 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 blah. Or I can say, hey, tell me a little bit more about when you said this. I'm just curious, or I really want to understand.
Yeah.
Even though all your intentions were great, et cetera, but when you tell me that,
right.
One, that's holding you accountable because now the accountability is you reflecting and saying, why did I? Oh, this is what this means to me.
Yeah.
And it also helps me to be accountable for any kind of story I was telling myself. And I talk about curiosity is care. Because for me to be curious about you in a very open way, that means I have to suspend my own reactivity. I have to be able to have a deeper threshold of vulnerability. And I have to pause. That's showing a lot of care towards another person.
Yeah.
And I'm also inviting you to think about whatever it is that happened, where you might get deeper meaning, or you may feel, that was just a throwaway thing. This is what I said, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And I can then share with you, this is, really the impact. And you might say, holy cow, or I never knew, but I'm not saying you're a terrible person. So in the friction, in the curiosity, in this way of holding somebody accountable through curiosity, there's actually greater connection.
Yeah.
Because there was rigor there.
Right.
And it wasn't judgmental. I was listening to you, but it doesn't mean that when you said this thing that was an awful thing and I give you the context, I'm just letting it ride and say, oh, she didn't mean it. I'm going to say, I want to share with you what it meant to me. Now you're understanding this too.
Yeah.
But there's not a judgment with it or you're blah, 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 terrible person.
Right.
And that is a gift of curiosity and how it aligns so well with accountability. Curiosity is not only can result in care and connection, but curiosity is also the antidote to action bias. Because I got to take a beat and think and reflect and maybe invite somebody in conversation where I need to be self-regulated.
Yeah.
Which many of us don't know how to do.
Back to the nervous system.
How can you be a leader when you don't know how to be self-regulated?
Yeah. And at the same time, we don't naturally have the tools around us in most modern working environments to regulate easily without attention and learning.
Mm-hmm. It really has to be intrinsically motivated. What I'm asking or inviting people to do is they need to be intrinsically motivated. It can't be because these are the values on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And even if LinkedIn said, this is our culture, we do X, Y, and Z,
Right.
it becomes a hammer. And then I learn how to kind of like circumvent and just put on a face.
Yeah.
Versus me really absorbing and being able to do this in a way of intentionality where I'm looking at myself in the mirror too.
So this leads me to a sort of a final question, Aiko, which is, why now? Why in the spring of 2026 does this book meet us?
If I'm honest, it's the book that I would have wanted anyway in my 20s, 30s, and 40s. But I think right now we are still caught in this idea of looking outwards for answers and pointing fingers. And this leader's terrible, that leader's terrible. And we don't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
The only thing we know that we can control is ourselves. And actually the greatest gifts we have is this complex machine in front of us, not AI, but us.
Yeah.
And it's such a gift. So learn it, this idea to learn it so that you can, one, be your own metronome, but you realize you have more agency than you think. And ecosystems don't just exist.
Yeah.
Like we comply with them and we become little, I say NPCs, like non-playable characters where we're just kind of going on with whatever the rules are versus recognizing you have some say in the rules. You may not be able to change everything over here, but you can behave differently, shift, and live a life that doesn't have regret, have much more intentionality.
That was Aiko Bethea, leadership coach and author of Anchored, Aligned, Accountable, a framework for transcending bullshit and transforming our lives and work. You can find it anywhere books are sold, and I hope you will. I'm Jessi Hempel, and this is Hello Monday. Thanks for joining us. I'll see you next week. Hello Monday is a production of LinkedIn News. The show is produced by Ava Ahmedbegi and Rachel Karp. Sarah Storm is our senior producer. Sound design and engineering by Asaf Gedron. The show is mixed by Tim Boland. Our theme music was composed just for us by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. Michaela Greer is a friend of the show forever, as is Victoria Taylor. Kyle Ranson-Walsh is editor-at-large of editorial graphics. Dave Pond is head of production and creative operations. Courtney Coop is head of original programming. Dan Roth is the editor-in-chief of LinkedIn. I'm Jessi Hempel. This is Hello Monday. See you next week.